Hello and welcome to Liberty Readers. My name is Candy, the Storybook Lady, and we are here for another night of reading. We are reading The Horse and His Boy, the third book in the Chronicles of Narnia. So, we are well on our way in our adventure. Who are our two main characters? That's right, we have Shasta and Aravan, right? And what's unique about, or what do they both have in common? That's right. They've run away from home for different reasons, right? And so they met along the way as they were running away. And where are they both headed to? That's right. They both are actually headed to Narnia. And on the way to Narnia, they had to stop through a town, right? That's right. And what happened in the town? That's right. They got separated, right? And they each had their own little mini adventure. They ended up meeting up again, right? And who are their two companions? That's right. We have Bree and the other talking horse, Hwin, right? And they talk. That's the amazing thing about them. And they're actually from Narnia. So they've all met up along the way for different reasons, and they are headed to Narnia. And as they leave the town, what is kind of going on behind the scenes? That's right. We have a prince called Rapidash who's on his way to try to marry Queen Susan because she didn't want to marry him. And she turned him down, and he's upset about that. So he's not a very nice guy. And so he's coming to try to take over Narnia, right? And they find themselves in the midst of that, trying to help as best they can, right? So where are they now? That's right. So they're separated once again. So we have Bree, Hwin, and Erebus in a town called, I believe it was, started with an A, right? Archerland, right? And then so they're there. And how did Shasta get separated this time? This is right. So if you remember, Shasta ended up saving Erebus from a lion, right? And so he saved them. They got them to safety, and then because Rapidash is on their heels, he had to run ahead so he can warn King Loon, right? That Rapidash is coming. And so once he got there, he did warn King Loon successfully. He ran all the way there. Remember that was the instructions from the guy who's housing Bree, Hwin, and Arvis. He said you have to run straight and never stop running. So he ran a really long time to warn King Loon, and he successfully warned him. And as he's following behind them, what happens? Yeah, he gets separated from them. So now he's walking along a path. It's all dark. He doesn't really know where he is, and something is walking beside him, and he doesn't quite know what it is. So that's what we're going to find out tonight. Who or what is walking beside Shasta as he's riding this horse, and is King Loon going to get back in time to prevent Prince Rapidash from, ruining his land and taking over the land? What's going to happen with Prince Abidash? What's happening with Queen Susan? We got a lot of questions, a lot of action. So let's get started and find out where we go tonight. Once more he felt the breath of the thing on his hand and his face. There, it said, that is not the breath of a ghost. Tell me your sorrows. Shasta was a little reassured by the breath, so he told him how he had never known his real father or mother and had been brought up sternly by the fishermen. And he told the story of his escape and how they were chased by lions and forced to swim for their lives, and of all the dangers in Tashbaan, and about his night among the tombs and how the beasts howled at him out of the desert. And he told him about the heat and the thirst of their desert journey, and how they were almost at their goal when another lion chased them and wounded Arvis. And also how very long it was that since he had had anything to eat. I do not call you unfortunate, said the large voice. Don't you think it was bad luck to meet so many lions? Sorry, wait, let me. I do not call you unfortunate, said the large voice. Don't you think it was bad luck to meet so many lions? Said Shasta. There was only one lion, said the voice. What on earth do you mean? I've just told you there were at least two the first night, and there was only one, but he was swift of foot. How do you know? I was the lion. And as Shasta gaped with open mouth and said nothing, the voice continued. I was a lion who forced you to join with Erebus. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was a lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was a lion who gave the horses the new strength of fear for the last mile, so that you should reach King Loon in time. And I was a lion you do not remember who pushed the boat in which you lay, a child near death, so that it came to shore where a man sat, wakeful at midnight to receive you. Then it was you who wounded Arvis? It was I. But what for? Child, said the voice, I'm telling you your story, not hers. I tell no one any story but his own. Who are you? Asked Shasta. Myself, said the voice very deep and low, so the earth shook. And again, myself, loud and clear and gay. And then the third time, myself, whispered so softly you could hardly hear it. And yet it seemed to come from all round you, as if the leaves rustled with it. Shasta was no longer afraid that the voice belonged to someone or something that would eat him, nor that it was the voice of a ghost. But a new and different sort of trembling came over him, yet he felt glad too. The mist was turning from black to gray, and from gray to white. This must have begun to happen some time ago, but while he had been talking to the thing, he had not been noticing anything else. Now, the whiteness around him became a shining whiteness. His eyes began to blink. Somewhere ahead, he could hear the birds singing. He knew the night was over at last. He could see the mane and ears and head of his horse quite easily now. A golden light fell on them from the left. He thought it was the sun. He turned and saw, pacing beside him, taller than a horse, a lion. The horse did not seem to be afraid of it, or else could not see it. It was from the lion that the light came. No one ever saw anything more terrible or beautiful. Luckily, Shasta had lived all his life too far south in Calormen to have heard the tales that were whispered in Tashbaan about a dreadful Narnian demon that appeared in the form of a lion. And of course he knew none of the true stories about Aslan, the great lion, the son of the emperor over the sea, the king above all high kings in Narnia. But after one glance at the lion's face, he slipped out of the saddle and fell at its feet. He couldn't say anything, but then he didn't want to say anything, and he knew he didn't need to say anything. The high king above all kings stooped toward him. Its mane and some strange and solemn perfume that hung about the mane was all round him. It touched his forehead with its tongue. He lifted his face and their eyes met. Then instantly, the pale brightness of the mist and the fiery brightness of the lion rolled themselves together into a swirling glory and gathered themselves up and disappeared. He was alone with the horse on a grassy hillside under a blue sky, and there were birds singing. Was it all a dream? Wondered Shasta. But it couldn't have been a dream, for there in the grass before him he saw the deep, large print of the lion's front right paw. It took one's breath away to think of the weight that could make a footprint like that. But there was something more remarkable than the size about it. And he looked at it. Water had already filled the bottom of it. Soon it was full to the brim and then overflowing, and a little stream was running downhill past him over the grass. Shasta stooped and drank, a very long drink, and then dipped his face in and splashed his head. It was extremely cold and clear as glass, and refreshed him very much. After that, he stood up, shaking the water out of his ears and flinging the wet hair back from his forehead, and began to take stock of his surroundings. Apparently, it was still very early morning. The sun had only just risen, and it had risen out of the forest, which he saw low down and far away from his right. The country which he was looking at was absolutely new to him. It was a green valley land, dotted with trees, through which he caught the gleam of a river that wound away roughly to the northwest. On the far side of the valley there was high and even rocky hills, but they were lower than the mountains he had seen yesterday. Then he began to guess where he was. He turned and looked behind him and saw the slope on which he was standing belonged to a range of far higher mountains. "I see," said Shasta to himself. "Those are the big mountains between Archenland and Narnia. I was on the other side of them yesterday. I must have come through the pass in the night. What luck that I hit it. At least it wasn't luck at all, really. It was him. And now I'm in Narnia." He turned and unsaddled his horse and took off its bridle. "Though you are a perfectly horrid horse," he said. It took no notice of this remark and immediately began eating grass. That horse had a very low opinion of Shasta. "I wish I could eat grass," thought Shasta. "It's no good going back to Onvard. It'll all be besieged. I'd better get lower down in the valley and see if I can get anything to eat." So he went on downhill. The thick dew was cruelly cold to his bare feet, till he came into a wood. There was a kind of track running through it, and he had not followed this for many minutes when he heard a thick and rather wheezy voice saying to him, "Good morning, neighbor." Shasta looked around eagerly to find the speaker, and presently saw a small, prickly person with a dark face who had just come from among the trees. At least it was small for a person, but very big indeed for a hedgehog, which was what it was. "Good morning," said Shasta, "but I'm not a neighbor. In fact, I'm a stranger in these parts." "Ah," said the hedgehog inquiringly, "I've come over the mountains from Archenland, you know." "Ah, Archenland," said the hedgehog. "That's a terrible long way. Never been there myself." "And I think, perhaps," said Shasta, "someone ought to be told that there's an army of savage Calormens attacking Onvard at this very moment." "You don't say so," answered the hedgehog. "Well, think of that, and they do say that Calormen is hundreds and thousands of miles away, right at the world's end, across a great sea of sand." "It's not nearly as far as you think," said Shasta. "And oughtn't something to be done about this attack on Onvard? Oughtn't your High King be told?" "Sure. Something ought to be done about it," said the hedgehog. "But you see, I'm just on my way to bed for a good day's sleep. Hello, neighbor." The last words were addressed to an immense biscuit-colored rabbit, whose head just popped up from somewhere beneath the path. The hedgehog immediately told the rabbit what it had just learned from Shasta. The rabbit agreed that this was very remarkable news and that somebody ought to tell someone about it with a view to do something. And so it went on. Every few minutes they were joined by other creatures, some from the branches overhead and some from the little underground houses at their feet, till the party consisted of 5 rabbits, a squirrel, 2 magpies, a goat-foot fawn, and a mouse, who all talked at the same time and all agreed with the hedgehog. For the truth was that it was that golden age when the witch and the winter had gone and Peter, the High King, ruled at Cair Paravel. The smaller woodland people of Narnia were so safe and happy that they were getting a little careless. Presently, however, two more practical people arrived in the little wood. One was a red dwarf, whose name appeared to be Duffel. The other was a stag, a beautiful, lordly creature with the wide, liquid eyes, dappled flanks, and legs so thin and graceful that they looked as if you could break them with 2 fingers. "Lion alive!" roared the dwarf as soon as he had heard the news. "And if that's so, why are we all standing still chattering? Enemies at Onvard? News must be sent to Cair Paravel at once. The army must be called out. Narnia must go to the aid of King Lune." "Ah," said the hedgehog, "but you won't find the High King of Cair. He's away to the north trouncing those giants. And talking of giants, neighbors, that puts me in the mind." "Who'll take our message?" interrupted the dwarf. "Anyone here got more speed than me?" "I've got speed," said the stag. "What's my message? How many Calormens?" 200 under Prince Rabadash, and—" But the stag was already away, all 4 legs off the ground at once, and in a moment its white stern had disappeared among the remoter trees. "Wonder where he's going," said Rabbit. "He won't find the High King at Cair Paravel, you know." "He'll find Queen Lucy," said Duffel, and then, "Hello, what's wrong with the human? It looks pretty green. Why, I do believe it's quite faint. Perhaps it's mortal hungry. When did you last have a meal, youngster?" "Yesterday morning," said Shasta weakly. "Come on, then, come on," said the dwarf at once, throwing his thick little arms around Shasta's waist to support him. "Why, neighbors, we ought to be ashamed of ourselves. You come with me, lad. Breakfast. Better than talking." With a great deal of bustle, muttering reproaches to itself, the dwarf half led and half supported Shasta at a great speed further into the wood and a little downhill. It was a longer walk than Shasta wanted at that moment, and his legs had begun to feel very shaky before they came out from the trees onto bare hillside. There they found a little house with a smoking chimney and an open door, and they came to the door, and as they came to the doorway, Duffel cried out, "Hey, brothers, a visitor for breakfast!" And immediately, mixed with a sizzling sound, there came to Shasta a simply delightful smell. It was one he had never smelled in his life before, but I hope you have. It was, in fact, the smell of bacon and eggs and mushrooms, all frying in a pan. "Mind your head, lad," said Duffel a moment too late, for Shasta had already bashed his forehead against the low lintel of the door. "Now," continued the dwarf, "sit you down. The table's a bit low for you, but then the stool's low too. That's right. And here's the porridge, and here's a jug of cream, and here's a spoon." By the time Shasta had finished his porridge, the dwarf's 2 brothers, whose names were Rogan and Bricklethumb, were putting the dish of bacon and eggs and mushrooms, and the coffee pot and the hot milk and the toast on the table. It was all new and wonderful to Shasta, for Calormen food is quite different. He didn't even know what the slices of brown stuff were, for he had never seen toast before. He didn't know what the yellow soft thing they smeared on the toast was, because in Calormen you nearly always got oil instead of butter. And the house itself was quite different from the dark, frosty, fish-smelling hut of Arshish, and from the pillared and carpeted halls in the palaces of Tashbaan. The roof was very low, and everything was made of wood, and there was a cuckoo clock, and a red and white checked tablecloth, and a bowl of wild flowers, and little curtains on the thick paned windows. It was also rather troublesome, having to use dwarf cups, and plates and knives and forks. This meant that helpings were very small, but then there were a great many helpings, so that Shasta's plate or cup was being filled every moment, and every moment the doors themselves were saying, "Butter, please," or "Another cup of coffee," or "I'd like a few more mushrooms," or "What about frying another egg or so?" And when at last they'd all eaten as much as they possibly could, the three dwarfs drew lots for who would do the washing up, and Rogan was the unlucky one. Then Duffel and Bricklethumb took Shasta out to a bench, which ran against the cottage wall, and they all stretched out their legs and gave a great sigh of contentment, and the two dwarfs lit their pipes. The dew was off the grass now, and the sun was warm. Indeed, if there hadn't been a light breeze, it would have been too hot. "Now, stranger," said Duffel, "I'll show you the lie of the land. You can see nearly all South Narnia from here, and we're rather proud of that view. Right away on your left, beyond those near hills, you can just see the western mountains. And that round hill away on your right is called the Hill of the Stone Table. Just beyond..." But at that moment he was interrupted by a snore from Shasta, who, with his night's journey and excellent breakfast, had gone fast asleep. The kindly dwarves, as soon as they noticed this, began making signs to each other not to wake him, and indeed did so much whispering and nodding and getting up and tiptoeing away that they certainly would have waked him if he had been less tired. He slept pretty well nearly all day, but woke up in time for supper. The beds in that house were all too small for him, but they made him a fine bed of heather on the floor, and he never stirred or dreamed all night. The next morning they had just finished breakfast when they heard a shrill, exciting sound from outside. "Trumpets!" said all the dwarfs, as they and Shasta all came running out. The trumpets sounded again, a new noise to Shasta, not huge and solemn like the horns of Tashbaan, nor gay and merry like King Loon's hunting horn, but clear and sharp and valiant. The noise was coming from the woods to the east, and soon there was a noise of horse hoofs mixed with it. A moment later he heard the head of the column came into sight. First came the Lord Paradan on a bay horse, carrying the great banner of Narnia, a red lion on a green ground. Shasta knew him at once. Then came 3 people riding a beast, 2 on great chargers and 1 on a pony. The 2 on the chargers were King Edmund and a fair-haired lady with a very merry face, who wore a helmet and a mail shirt, and carried a bow across her shoulder and a quiver full of arrows at her side. "The Queen Lucy," whispered Duffel. But the one on the pony was Corin. After that came the main body of the army, men on ordinary horses, men on talking horses, who didn't mind being ridden on proper occasions, as when Narnia went to war. Centaurs, stern, hard-bitten bears, great talking dogs, and last of all, 6 giants. For there are good giants in Narnia. But though he knew they were on the right side, Shasta at first could hardly bear to look at them. There are some things that take a lot of getting used to. Just as the king and queen reached the cottage and the dwarfs began making low bows to them, King Edmund called out, "Now, friends, time for a halt and a morsel." And at once there was a great bustle of people dismounting and haversacks being opened and conversation beginning, when Corin came running up to Shasta and seized both his hands and cried, "What? You here? So you got through all right. I am glad. Now we shall have some sport. Isn't it luck? We only got into the harbor at Cair Paravel yesterday morning, and the very first person who met us was Shirvy the Stag, with this news of an attack on Onvard. Don't you think—" "Who is your Highness's friend?" asked King Edmund, who had just got off his horse. "Don't you see, sire?" said Corin. "It's my double, the boy you mistook me for at Tashbaan." "Why, so he is your double!" exclaimed Queen Lucy. "As like as 2 twins. This is a marvelous thing." "Please, your majesty," said Shasta to King Edmund, "I was no traitor. Really, I wasn't, and I couldn't help overhearing your plans, but I never dreamed of telling them to your enemies." "I know now that you were no traitor, boy," said King Edmund, laying his hand on Shasta's head. But if you would not be taken for one, another time try not to hear what's meant for others' ears. But all's well. After that, there was so much bustle and talk and coming and going that Shasta for a few minutes lost sight of Corin and Edmund and Susie and Lucy. But Corin was the sort of boy whom one is sure to hear of pretty soon, and it wasn't very long before Shasta heard King Edmund saying in a loud voice, "By the lion's mane, Prince, this is too much." "Will your Highness never be better? You are more of a heart-scald than our whole armies together. I'd as lief have a regiment of hornets in my command as you." Shasta wormed his way through the crowd and there saw Edmund looking very angry indeed, Corin looking a little ashamed of himself, and a strange dwarf sitting on the ground making faces. A couple of fawns had apparently just been helping it out of its armor. "If only I had but my cordial with me," Queen Lucy was saying, "I could soon mend this. But the High King has so strictly charged me not to carry it commonly to the wars and to keep it only for great extremities." What had happened was this. As soon as Corin had spoken to Shasta, Corin's elbow had been plucked by a dwarf in the army called Thornbutt. "What is it, Thornbutt?" Corin had said. "Your Royal Highness," said Thornbutt, drawing him aside, "our march today will bring us through the pass and right to your royal father's castle. We may be in battle before night." "I know," said Corin. "Isn't it splendid?" "Splendid or not," said Thornbutt, "I have the strictest orders from King Edmund to see to it that your Highness is not in the fight. You will be allowed to see it, and that's treat enough for your Highness's little years." "Oh, what nonsense!" Corin burst out. "Of course I'm going to fight. Why, the Queen Lucy's going to be with the archers." "The Queen's Grace will do as she pleases," says Thornbutt, "but you are in my charge. Either I must have your solemn and princely word that you'll keep your pony beside mine, not half a neck ahead, till I give your Highness leave to depart, or else either I must have your solemn and princely word that you'll keep your pony beside mine, not half a neck ahead, till I give your Highness leave to depart, or else it is His Majesty's word, we must go with our wrists tied together like two prisoners." "I'll knock you down if you try to bind me," said Corin. "I'd like to see your Highness do it," said the dwarf. That was quite enough for a boy like Corin, and in a second he and the dwarf were at it, hammer and tongs. It would have been an even match for, though Corin had longer arms and more height, the dwarf was older and tougher. But it was never fought out. That's the worst of fights on a rough hillside. For by the very bad luck, Thornbutt trod on a loose stone, came flat down on his nose, and found when he tried to get up that he had sprained his ankle. A real excruciating sprain, which would keep him from walking or riding for at least a fortnight. "See what your Highness has done," said King Edmund. "Deprived us of proved warrior on the very edge of battle." "I'll take his place, sire," said Corin. "Psh!" said Edmund. "No one doubts your courage, but a boy in battle is a danger only to his own side." At that moment the king was called away to attend to something else, and Corin, after apologizing handsomely to the dwarf, rushed up to Shasta and whispered, "Quick, there's a spare pony now, and the dwarf's armor. Put it on before anyone notices." "What for?" said Shasta. "Why, so that you and I can fight in the battle, of course. Don't you want to?" "Oh, yes, of course," said Shasta, but he hadn't been thinking on doing so at all, and began to get a most uncomfortable prickly feeling in his spine. "That's right," said Corin. "Over your head. Now the sword belt, but we must ride near the tail of the column and keep as quiet as a mouse. Once the battle begins, everyone will be far too busy to notice us. By 11 o'clock, the whole company was once more on the march, riding westward with the mountains on their left. Corin and Shasta rode right at the rear with the giants immediately in front of them. Lucy and Edmund and Peridian were busy with their plans for the battle, and though Lucy once said, "But where is his goose-cap, Highness?" Edmund only replied, "Not in the front, and that's good news enough. Leave well alone." Shasta told Corin most of his adventures and explained that he had learned all his riding from a horse and didn't really know how to use the reins. Corin instructed him in this, and besides telling him all about their secret sailing from Tashbaan. "And where is the Queen Susan?" "At Cair Paravel," said Corin. "She's not like Lucy. She's who's as good as a man, or at any rate as good as a boy. Queen Susan is more like a normal, ordinary grown-up lady. She doesn't ride to the wars, though she is an excellent archer." The hillside path which they were following became narrower all the time, and the drop on their right had become steeper. At last they were going in a single file along the edge of the precipice, and Shasta shuddered to think that he had done the same thing last night without knowing it. But of course, he thought, I was quite safe. That is why the lion kept on my left. He was between me and the edge all the time. Then the path went left and south away from the cliff, and there were thick woods on both sides of it, and they went steeply up and up into the pass. There would have been a splendid view from the top if it were open ground, but among all those trees you could see nothing. Only every now and then some huge pinnacle of rock above the tree tops, and an eagle or two wheeling high up in the blue air. "They smell battle," said Corin, pointing to the birds. "They know we're preparing a feed for them." Shasta didn't like this at all. When they had crossed the neck of the pass and came a good deal lower, they reached more open ground, and from here Shasta could see all Archenland, blue and hazy, spread out below him, and even, he thought, a hint of the desert beyond it. But the sun, which had perhaps 2 hours or so to go before it set, was in his eyes, and he couldn't make things out distinctly. Here the army halted and spread out in a line, and there was a great deal of rearranging. A whole detachment of very dangerous-looking talking beasts whom Shasta had not noticed before, and who were mostly of the cat kind, leopards, panthers, and the like, went padding and growling to take up their positions on the left. The giants were ordered to the right, and before going, they all took off something they had been carrying on their backs and sat down for a moment. Then Shasta saw that what they had been carrying and were now putting on their pairs of boots, horrid, heavy, spiked boots, which came up to their knees. Then they sloped their huge clubs over their shoulders and marched to their battle position. The archers with Queen Lucy fell to the rear, and you could first see them bending their bows, and then hear the twang, twang, as they tested the strings. And wherever you looked, you could see people tightening girths, putting on helmets, drawing swords, and throwing cloaks to the ground. There was hardly any talking now. It was very solemn and very dreadful. "I'm in for it now. I really am in for it now," thought Shasta. Then there came noises far ahead, the sound of many men shouting, and a steady thud, thud, thud. "Battering ram," whispered Corin. "They're battering the gate." Even Corin looked quite serious now. And that is where we will stop for tonight. Oh my goodness, it looks like Shasta is on the brink of war. What will happen? I am not sure. So thank you for joining us again. We will see you next week, same time, same place.